Thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to take a minute to introduce all of our panelists. So Mansour Hajjar is the country manager for the UAE and India for Chalhoub Group. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Chalhoub, but it's basically a conglomerate of luxury brands, both fashion and homeware. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mansour?
That's correct, yeah. And beauty as well.
And beauty as well. Mohamad Ballout, Endeavor entrepreneur, two-time Endeavor entrepreneur, and co-founder and CEO of Kitopi, which is a kitchen-as-a-service business where Kitopi cooks and delivers food on behalf of restaurant brands. Michelle Walsh is the Senior Director of Marketing and Communications for Majid Futtaim shopping malls. And finally, we have Saad Masri, Research Manager at Ipsos Saad. So, I mean, the pandemic has brought on changes on so many levels, but still one of the issues that is on every entrepreneur's mind is the changes in their consumers' behavior and their buying habits. So, and this is what we're going to be discussing today. So to kick us off, Saad will start, he'll give us a brief presentation. So we have for this panel a total of 45 minutes. So we'll start off with a brief presentation from Saad on current global consumer sentiment and some data on consumer behavior. So Saad, go ahead.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and very happy to be here. Let me just share my screen. Okay, let me know when you see it. Good. So basically, as you mentioned, Diala, obviously with COVID, there's been a lot of changes for consumer behavior. We've been trending and kind of looking at insights from these consumers, trying to understand what the forecast would look like, what their current behavior looks like, and how the changes are impacting businesses in order for us to help them make their decisions and basically strategize for their way forward. So to start, I'm going to go over the consumer sentiment. Overall, it's a global metric that we have to kind of understand purchasing trends, how people feel about the economy, about their current financial situation, and that will give us an indication of the state of mind that these consumers are coming from. So for the primary consumer sentiment index, it's based on 4 different indices. The first is their current personal financial conditions. So we ask them questions about whether or not they feel like their current financial conditions are good, whether or not they expect that they'll be able to meet their bills, etc. The economic expectations. So how does the future look like? Is it resolved? The country's situation, is the economy going to be in a good state or not? The overall investment climate. So is it a good time to invest, make large purchases, purchase durables, things like that. And finally, and one of the more important ones is the employment confidence index, which basically outlines whether or not people feel secure about their jobs and whether or not they've known people who've lost their jobs. And that gives you an indication of whether or not people are going to be saving or spending, or what that consumer behavior looks like. So these components make up the primary consumer sentiment index. I'm going to go over the overall results. I'm not sure if you see this, but... So on a global average, this national index, it combines 24 countries across the globe, and it looks at the combination of those indices that I just mentioned. So what we're seeing is that on average, it's around 46.7, and that's the all-time average. In June of this year, the consumer sentiment index reached its lowest point since it started being recorded in March of 2010. So you can understand basically the level of concern that citizens had, and the lower level of them of their spending habits, and how they were trying to kind of save up, and that they felt that the economy was unresolved. But for the past 3 months, since June, we have seen slight uptick, and for September, it's reached another high. So there is basically positive sentiment is growing amongst consumers on an overall level. So if you want to look at it by the different countries, you can see here the national index for each of the markets that we covered. And you can see the difference compared to January. So compared to January, it's down almost 6 points on a global level. And specifically, you can see across all the different markets how it's gone down. But if we compare it, and you can see here the numbers on the right, if you compare it to what's happening since June, there has been a significant uptick. The one country that we have to basically showcase what MENA looks like is Saudi Arabia, because it's the largest economy in the MENA region, and you can see that there has been an uptick since June. So that's basically just to kind of set the scene for what people's sentiment on an overall level looks like across the globe and in Saudi Arabia. If we were to look at the MENA region, what we saw across the past few months was that a lot of people felt that they had a significant threat to their jobs and to their businesses. You can see that almost 7 in 10 residents across the MENA region have mentioned that they worry about their jobs and that they feel like it's a threat. In KSA and UAE, it was the highest, followed by the other markets, but it's quite high across the region. And that should give you an indication that these individuals are worried about not being able to actually provide for themselves and their families. And that was another metric that we covered. And a lot of people mentioned that they were extremely concerned and very concerned, specifically in UAE and Lebanon, but in other markets as well. So 4 in 10 being the least figure that we have of people who are concerned about being able to provide for their families. And that follows through about paying their bills. So not even just consuming discretionary products and things that are not necessarily needs, but wants. You can see that a lot of people are actually worried about whether or not they'll be able to meet their responsibilities on a monthly basis. And that follows through to the kind of the atmosphere that these families are living in across the MENA region. Which basically we've seen has driven a lot of people to try to control what they have. So they're trying to control their spending, they're trying to save more and kind of put away things for a darker period. And so that's basically what we're seeing. Almost 4 in 10 in KSA and UAE and other markets are trying to control their spending and put more of their allowance or their salaries into savings for future needs. So that's to kind of give you the financial aspect of it. When we looked at basically the shopping behavior, and I think this is not something that's lost on anyone, is that upswing of e-commerce across the MENA region. One thing that was of note was that it was a very dramatic and drastic uptick. So it wasn't something that was slow or monitored, and maybe even it exceeded a lot of people's expectations. So when you're seeing somewhere like KSA and UAE that had a much lower e-commerce penetration in the past few years, you saw that KSA, for instance, has a 93% e-commerce penetration, and that people are more frequently buying products that they would normally buy in store through online channels. Obviously, the lockdown had a very big role to play in that, but we're talking about online internet shopping and not basically calling the local grocer or someone from across the supermarket, but it was actually online purchasing. So that being that high is resonating across the region, and it has instigated all of the different organizations that we work with to start wondering about how they can shift their businesses to the digital marketplace in order for them to get a share of the pie and remain relevant for the consumers that they work with. Just to give you an example of how much e-commerce has shot in the past few years, if you look at basically, we ran a study, an e-commerce study in September of 2019, and you can see that almost 5 in 10 individuals or residents of KSA had basically done some form of shopping online in the past year. Most of that kind of was within electronics, within fashion. These are usually the entry points when it comes to e-commerce. Something like grocery, not that high penetration and even lower frequency. So you can imagine that basically that's the scene that we had, and the expectation for how fast it was going to grow was definitely steep. However, COVID really accelerated that. So in the e-commerce penetration in KSA during the COVID period was around 91%, which is a 98% increase. Something like groceries grew by 250%. So 80% of people had done some form of online shopping for groceries in KSA. So just to give you an example of KSA, and this was something that we witnessed across the MENA region. Moving on to even more of the digital consumption and basically how things have changed for a lot of people, you see that there's a very high increase in the amount of time that people are on their screens. So there was a 91% jump during COVID periods versus pre-COVID periods about the amount of hours that they spend online. And I think I even see that for myself. I'm looking at my phone and I can see the average time that I'm spending on these screens has really shot up. And that's the case across the region. And it's really opened up a much bigger, a wider profile and a wider audience to target through online means. So whenever we were talking about digital marketing and people targeting people through social media, we always kind of wanted to see which segments we weren't actually capturing. But with the advent of this increase in the amount of time people are spending online, and with the advent of the increase on the amount of channels that they're using, you can see that now it's becoming even more relevant to market and advertise to these individuals through these channels. So you can see, for instance, 94% penetration of social media and sharing platforms, and 66% in increase of consumption in KSA. You can see also video on demand platforms, 73% of people mentioned that they're using these platforms, and there's a 70% almost increase in their consumption. What's more is that people are mentioning that they are likely to continue their online habits and consuming media and content through online in the similar fashion in the coming months. So whether it's because they're feeling that the pandemic is going to continue, or because they're just kind of building in new habits into their daily lives, this is kind of what consumers are feeling in this period. So finally, I just want to touch on whether or not we're seeing a return to normal. I think that on an overall level, not a single country in MENA is looking to a complete and total shutdown at any point. So when we ask consumers if they feel like we should shut down the country or shut down the economy, even if the virus continues to spread, no one, almost a very small percentage said yes, especially in KSA and UAE. A bigger portion in Egypt, but still not that significant. And you can see that even if the virus continues to spread at a very high rate, they're saying that the economy should remain open in places like KSA and UAE, and even in Egypt. So over 3 in 10 individuals across these markets still feel like they want to continue, they want to sustain their livelihoods. And that big question of lives versus livelihood comes to the forefront, but you definitely see that a lot of people are worried about the economy, and that the virus needs to be maintained, of course, but the economy is also important, and keeping the country open is very important. That being said, when we look at other discretionary things like travel and tourism, you're seeing smaller percentages of people mentioning that they want to travel by air, or they want to allow tourists into the market a little bit more in Egypt than it is in KSA and UAE. In terms of shopping behavior, you can see that a lot of people still want to go to the grocery stores, still want to visit malls. Making major purchases was lower in KSA and UAE, but Egypt, it seems like they're not feeling the brunt of that as much. So we're seeing that these variabilities are likely, and that even with e-commerce being something that people like, we've seen that with frequent e-commerce users, even in past research, that they still want to go to the malls, they still want to go to the grocery store, they still like to pick these things out because it's a source of entertainment, and it's a source of basically spending time out of the home. So it is something that they're looking forward to doing. And in terms of going back to work, you can see, in line with the fact that they want to keep the country open, is that a lot of people do want to actually go back to work, almost 50% in KSA and UAE, and even higher in Egypt. That being said, allowing children to go to school was something that we saw people be a bit apprehensive about. And I think we've seen that uptick in the number of cases across different markets where schools have opened up and people have gone back. And that's why maybe there's a shift towards going back to work being okay, but maybe schools being something that they're not sure about. Finally, with the other types of activities, dining out, going to the cinema, going to the gym, people are still a bit apprehensive. We see that less in KSA, we see that less in Egypt, and the most in KSA. That being said, these are changes that we're expecting to happen on a day-to-day basis. These numbers basically are shifting weekly, and we're seeing that people are becoming less worried, less scared, and kind of following the news to know how to react to the situation. So this is just a quick tidbit on from my end, just to kind of give you some information that we've collected in the past few months. It's been very interesting, to be completely honest, to get the snapshot, because I think we're witnessing a very historic period, and kind of capturing as much data as possible to kind of cement it into how people are feeling and how consumers are reacting. So these are my notes, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Diala, anything? Talia?
Thank you, Saad. That was really, really helpful. I think with the e-commerce penetration, that's probably one or probably the only positive thing that's come out of the pandemic. Saad, we've had a question. Maybe later we can take this offline, but would it be possible to share the slides with the participants later?
Of course, yeah, of course.
Absolutely, great. So thank you. If you could just stop sharing your screen, please. Thank you. Okay. So moving to our panelists, I want to start with Mansour. Mansour, you and I had a really interesting conversation about the impact of this crisis on your business and how you engaged with your customers during the lockdown and then later on as things started to open up again. Can you tell us more about what emerging trends you saw in your customers' buying habits and how Chalhoub as an organization, what you did differently in terms of your organizational structure, also to adapt and to cater to these changes?
Thank you, Dalia, and thank you, Saad, for the presentation. It was very insightful. And I think what I can start with is a continuation of what Saad has presented. Is very much in line with many of the numbers that you shared. Some of the numbers also I'll be sharing are based on the statistics and a survey that we've done with some of our customers. So the first element I'd like to share with you today is the fact that with COVID, we have witnessed an acceleration of the engagement experience of luxury with our consumers. So, prior to COVID, the luxury customers were more shy into engaging with the brands when it comes to luxury. This has accelerated it. So obviously, when COVID started, many of our brands, because we have a large number of brands, had no presence online, and we had to really put this on a fast track. Websites, online websites that used to take us 3-4 months to achieve, to put live, we had to finish them in 3 to 4 to 5 weeks maximum. And our teams have worked day and night to ensure that at least about 20 brands would have an online presence within this period of time. Now, at the same time, we wanted to engage with the consumers on several levels. The first level is related to addressing the concern about sanitization, about the security. And I'm talking during the lockdown period. So we had to beef up, increase our capacity in the warehouse because we did not expect that we would have such a peak of online orders. And this goes back again to numbers that were shared with Saad. We've seen a multiplier of almost 6 to 8 for certain brands between our normal e-commerce sales and during COVID sales. And being able to cater to 8 times normal sales were really impossible. So we had to shift some of our teams from the retail stores to the stores that were closed during the lockdown and ask them to help us out in the warehouse to be able to cope with the demand that you have from consumers. Obviously, all this had to be done while respecting the protocols of security, of sanitization, and so on. And then addressing it to the consumers, this meant that we need to use several layers of the packaging. We had to ensure that all the delivery teams are using gloves, offering contactless payments when they deliver the products, and so on. In parallel to this, you have also what we call the customer experience, and how can we, as luxury retailers, that proud ourselves in delivering what we call a memorable guest experience when the customers come to our stores, do the same online. So we have used and leveraged every single communication channel that was available. Should it be phone calls, should it be by WhatsApp, should it be by emails, should it be by SMS. Even we have put in place virtual shopping sales system. So to take you through a video experience eventually, to take you through a store for shopping, sending images, messages, and so on, to continue the engagement with the consumers. And the whole idea is not only to be here as a trading or as a customer-supply relationship, we wanted to be also sharing the pain of the lockdown with our customers and relieving it. So some of our brands, for example, have taken very interesting initiatives. One of our retail shops, which is specialized in shoes, the leather shoes, for instance, have organized workout sessions because of the fact that people are staying at home, workout session at home to keep people fit. One of our brands that caters to home product and homeware was organizing cooking lessons also for the customers to help them understand how to cook healthy products, healthy food, and so on, and how to make the timeless kind of thing. The other part of it, when we speak about the shift in the behavior, some of the major shifts were dictated by the change in lifestyle. I mean, all of us have lived the lockdown. We had to stay at home. And when you stay at home, all of a sudden you start realizing that you can do lots of improvements at home. And we've seen, not only for us at the luxury segment, we've seen for many of our peers, everything related to homeware for home improvement has peaked. And we've seen increases over 50% versus last year in demand for furniture, of home decoration items and other items as well related to it. And obviously in certain categories like fashion and like beauty, we've seen as well changes in shift within the categories. For instance, since people are staying at home, they were less interested in buying fashion, more interested in buying sneakers, more interested in buying athleisure. And when we surveyed our customers, we've seen when we asked them about fashion, 56% of the respondents said we're interested to buy sneakers, or we're buying sneakers. About 50% said we're buying the athleisure to feel comfortable at home. And interestingly as well, we've seen about 60% talking about jewelry. So the change we see here is the fact that people are looking more to purchasing items to treat themselves. And so contrary to the concept that when China reopened, people were speaking about revenge shopping, people are going back to the stores as a revenge to buy. But here it's more of treating yourself, of feeling good, and creating more intimacy in the products. And to even reinforce this example, we have another category, which is the beauty category, where you have the traditional fragrances, you have the skincare, and you have the makeup. And in this part of the world, the first category has been the fragrances pre-COVID, followed by makeup, and the smallest one was skincare. And because of the fact that people are staying at home, they were first more concerned about their safety. So we've seen a peak in the purchase of items related to cleansing and sanitization. And then we've seen also very huge demand for skincare, and even categories that were extremely small in the beauty segment, luxury beauty segment, including hair care, have seen a peak simply because people were not going to the salons and had to do all the treatment at home.
So I want to ask you, you also mentioned that, we touched upon this, you said, I think it was 16 or 20 of your brands managed to, that previously did not have online presence, managed to go online within a period of 6 weeks. Now, when I'm buying a luxury item, like you said, I want to get pampered. I want the experience to go to the store. I want to get, the smell of the luxury leather goods. I want to have that experience. And you talked about how you replicate that experience online. But now that things are gradually opening up and going back to somewhat, some kind of a normal, can you tell us what percentage of your sales now is coming from e-commerce versus the in-store?
So then there has been indeed a shift, and the shift has happened during the lockdown, and there have been some sort of continuation of the increase in sales on the online during the month of May and during the month of June. So, and then the market in the region were gradually reopening. Now, the reason why in May, despite in the UAE, for example, while the e-commerce sales were still high, despite the fact that the malls have opened, is the fact that there were lots of restrictions for people to visit the malls. People above the age of 60 or kids below the age of 12 were not allowed to go. Many of the entertainment areas were not open. And again, I go back to what Saad explained very well, that going to the malls in the region is part of our lifestyle. It's entertainment, it's a way of spending the day with the family and so on. And all these components were missing at that time. And so that explained the fact that people continued purchasing online. So we've seen a peak, which is I spoke of multiplier of 6 to 8 times during the lockdown and the period past lockdown. Today, we're almost at 3 times the sales of online that we had last year. which is becoming today the norm. So still it's a great achievement. So this means that today the online is here to stay. So that's something that we need to develop more and more. And as a matter of fact, the group had initiated this journey 3 years ago, but then this has only accelerated it. And at the same time, we see that the retail is gaining back its glory, it's gaining back its crown, I would say. In markets like Kuwait, like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia, we're almost back to normal sales compared to last year. Even we've seen sales during the month of July, August, and September higher than the period, the same period last year. Now, obviously, this is explained by the fact that people couldn't travel, couldn't leave the country, especially during summertime when people traditionally travel to Europe or travel to the Middle East or fresher places. So local consumption had delivered results in retail higher than the results of last year. And then the month of October, when we have the school starting again, we're still seeing, I would say, very strong sales, which gives us comfort that today the current trend is on the right. Again, going back to Saad's presentation, the consumer confidence is coming back gradually into the markets, particularly for the local consumers. And a beautiful example I can give is when I look at the market like the UAE, we see Abu Dhabi with results where you have sales higher than last year for the month of July, August, September, literally by 10-15%. While in Dubai, we are still below the sales of last year. And in certain malls that depend highly on tourism, we're more in double-digit minus versus last year than other places, other community malls in Dubai.
Yeah. So maybe Michelle, now we can jump to you and you can tell us what's happening at the mall. So I think a very obvious one is footfall. It was definitely negatively impacted at the beginning of the crisis, but now people are gradually going back to the malls. How, have footfall levels bounced back? And how do you compare the amount of time and the amount of money that people are spending in the mall today as compared to pre-COVID times?
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. I'm happy to be here. So I think, look, a story has to be told. Like, it's been a very interesting 7 months in all of our lives, and none that any of us, I think, have ever anticipated we would ever experience. And I think, look, I work obviously for Majid Al Futtaim, and I've joined the shopping malls business about 3 months ago. Before that, I was the chief operating officer of Vox Cinemas. So I've been at the coalface of 2 businesses that obviously are seeing a lot of impact. So I can probably give a perspective from both sides. I think when the crisis first hit, I think how Majid Al Futtaim handled or responded to the crisis was quite exemplary. So there were shutdowns, particularly within cinema and leisure and entertainment. And but what we were able to do was move a lot of staff from our cinema and entertainment business into our Carrefour shopping mall business. So we were quite proud of, as a business, being able to respond to such a crisis and put people's minds at ease that they would obviously still be needed by the company, and our staff were really willing to help out and go across to other areas of Majid Al Futtaim that were seeing a huge increase. So from that perspective, the company has had an interesting couple of months where some businesses have overperformed and others obviously have had to kind of adjust to a new normal situation. We have been obviously running our own sentiment surveys. So now, if I speak about shopping malls specifically, we've run 4 waves of customer sentiment surveys, which we started in May, and we've interviewed about 20,000 shopping mall customers during that time. We have found that general sentiment around confidence has correlated quite closely with the number of cases that we see in our markets. So if cases go down, confidence goes up. So cases go up, confidence is a little bit rattled. So in September, we did notice that confidence was a little bit rattled again because cases were going up, which we kind of anticipated. I think we are feeling, though, that people are getting used to a new normal. And what we've noticed in the 4th wave is impact of psychological, actually, on people's lives. So we're starting to see that people are getting really, really tired of lockdown and having, you know, this strict life. And we know we have to live it, but at some point we have to accept that it does affect people on a psychological basis. And we are starting to see people just saying, right, I will go back out now. I do want to try and have some kind of new normal. I am going to start going back to the malls. I am going to go back to cinema. I am going to start going back to food and beverage outlets and restaurants. And so not obviously at the pace that we saw before, but we are seeing that increasing, because I think just people have to try and, I suppose, live some kind of life where they just feel safe, but also something that's back to some kind of normal. And as I said, it's the psychological impact, I think, that we have to be really careful of moving forward. What they've told us is shopping malls is the number one thing that they feel the most comfort to go back to, because obviously they're seen as big white spaces. We have put a lot of operational procedures in place around safety. Temperatures are checked, and you know, operational procedures have changed. There's capacity limits. So they do see malls as a safe environment to still feel that they can go out. What the most interesting effect, and you asked about footfall, footfall is obviously still a little bit down in comparison to last year. However, conversion is up. So people are now going to the mall, and there's less on browsing and more, let's go and buy what I need to buy. I've already maybe researched it. And that's where omnichannel is starting to kick in, right? So people know what they're going to buy before they go to the mall. They've done their research. They go in and do it, and they leave. So that's what we are seeing as a behavior shift at the moment. So I agree with Mansour. We are seeing some categories are bounding back really nicely. You know, at the moment, like when it was first lockdown, electronics and homewares was quite high because people were getting used to having their own home office, and they obviously had to prepare for that. Now that people are saying, look, I need to go back out, we're seeing cosmetics and fashion starting to increase as well in terms of sales. So that correlates with the research, the customer sentiment. So that I think that's a really interesting trend that we're watching. People are coming back. The conversion rates are starting to become a lot higher, and they do want to come back as long as they're safe. I envisage that this is just going to continue because this is the new normal, and people are adjusting now.
Great. So actually, we're gonna. I want to move to Mohamad for a minute, but then I'm gonna go back to everyone and see if you think, you know, how long this will continue into the future. But Mohamad, I think you have visibility on the behavior of your end users, and I mean, correct me if you're wrong, but I think you can also give us some insight into how the businesses that you cater to, in terms of the restaurants and the brands that you serve, how they've handled it, so in terms of the restaurants and the end users as well.
Maybe I'll start with so hi everyone. Maybe I'll start with the restaurants first. And so if you asked me 12 months ago, I would say one of the biggest challenges we had is getting a lot of the very large QSRs, large brands, to understand the delivery world and to sign up to the cloud kitchen space. And I think the discussion now is they really don't have an option anymore. And the amount of brands who've been able to sign up to be in our space is grown substantially. We've grown the team by 10x into the onboarding team, just to make sure we can onboard brands across all our markets efficiently. So everyone understands that that's the only way to grow, and building brick and mortar stores alone is maybe not the most efficient use of their capital. So that's on one side. From a consumer perspective, we see discount sensitivities in an all-time high. So while there was always an impact on discounts, it was never to the extent that we see today. We used to get creative. We used to tell our brands to get creative with 2-for-1s, buy one get one, and find ways to not impact the average check. The reality is the only thing that's going to move the needle is a flat discount, and that's what's happening. So that's on one side. Second is, in different markets, average order values change. So initially it went up. Families were still from a UAE perspective, families were all still here during lockdown. So average order values went up. However, during the summer, particularly the last part of the summer, we realized average order values started going back down. And now they're lower than pre-COVID levels. So while volumes are substantially higher, average order values in food are down. And that's predominantly because less families, at least what we see, less families are in town. And people are ordering much more efficiently now for themselves. And what we also noticed is the weekday, weekend delta is much lower. So we used to notice that, you know, lunch on weekends are usually low time for us. And in the past 2-3 months, we have realized that there's actually, people are going out less, and there's less of a delta between weekday and weekend from a lunch perspective. So those are the, you know, key things we've noticed in this time.
That's really interesting, because people are spending more time at home even during the weekends, where they would have traditionally gone out to the restaurants and the brunches, and now they're just spending more with smaller groups as well. So Mohamad, how have you adapted your organization, or what have you done differently to cater to this? So I know that you've launched the groceries. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was that always part of your plan?
So there's two things that, you know, I think we did really well. One is we quickly understood that consumers were getting very cautious about on-demand food, and then moved towards groceries, and we capitalized on that. We also noticed that the convergence between on-demand food and groceries was happening. People didn't think that, you know, I need to go and order groceries, and then separately go think I want to order my pizza at night. So there was a convergence, and the big aggregators started moving on that, and we realized that, you know, 80% of what we need, 80% from an ingredients perspective, 80% of what we need already had in stock. So we could easily launch a grocery business in 10 days, and it's exactly what we did. So and that's been growing very well. We think that different to other grocery players, what we have is focus on much more perishable items, or such as proteins, vegetables, etc. And the second big observation, I said this, you know, maybe 3 months ago, I challenged one of the GMs of the largest aggregator in town. I was like, you know, the future of food is not going to come from a traditional restaurant. If you look at what's happening in beauty, it's a good example. I'm sure you can comment better than me. Is, you know, one of the best brands in town comes from a very strong blogger. And the future of food is going to probably follow a very similar trend. And today, our number one brand is a brand built by a great influencer who happens to cook really good food. And I think one of the key shifts we see is really brands need to start getting very innovative about how to engage with the consumer, because it's no longer going to be the way they used to engage, you know, 9 months ago.
So I want to go back to, and this is a question for everyone. I also want to open it up to the audience to ask questions. So please feel free to jump in or type your questions in the chat. But until then, how long do you think these changes in consumer behavior will last? Are these changes temporary? Do you think people have short-term memories, and then eventually we're going to go back to our original normal and our old buying habits? Or has there been a fundamental shift that will last well beyond COVID?
Perhaps I can start to share a few words about it, Hajjar. In our opinion today, many of the changes are...
Interrupt you for a second. I think your voice is not very clear. If you can maybe speak up or change the mic.
Let me try this. Can you hear me now?
I think this is okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think you're good to go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to speak louder. So some of the changes today some of the changes will be permanent, Dalia. Back, I think the point made earlier regarding the consumer changes are so pertinent. One of them is the fact that many people who are not online today have come online. The number of people who discovered that they can do their online shopping, they can order their groceries online. Many of these habits are here to stay. They may reduce a little bit, but they're certainly there. But then the biggest shift is the fact that today consumer will go more and more to local products as well. So we'll start seeing emergence of local talents, local designers, and both in terms of creation of products, at least our sector could be for fashion, could be for the beauty, could be for the giftware or homeware. So the demand for the local talents is going to be bigger. The second part of it also, the consumers will go more and more towards natural products. So the point made regarding the fact that the role of influencers today is quite important. I would say not only influencers, but the fact that during this, the COVID and during the lockdown, people had time to reflect on many aspects of how they want to treat their health. The sanitization was so important that people are shying away from chemical products, for example, which are using certain skincare, to go more for natural ingredients. And the fact that they had time to spend online to research and read about it made it even more relevant for the future, for a category where people read the small labels and read the content of the ingredients of the product. And that's in addition to the influencers who talk about it and promote it all the time.
Michelle, Saad, or Mohamad, do you have any comments?
Look, we have asked the question, obviously, in our waves, what we think people might continue post-COVID. And I think the working remotely seems to be kind of the number one thing that we think there's going to be some version of it now, or unstructured places of work, or a lot more kind of flexibility, which I think is an amazing shift forward for generally anybody in the work environment, particularly, you know, people that might have other responsibilities like working moms and dads and that type of thing. So I think that's something that it'll be interesting to see how that works out in the end for commercial real estate. But definitely from a mall perspective, we would be looking for opportunities to create co-working spaces and create opportunities, you know, or places for people to meet if offices are no longer going to be something that people go to on a day-to-day basis. And so I think that's something we're going to be watching very closely moving forward. I think, look, we feel that community malls are also strengthening as well. So there's a mindset that people want to stay a little bit closer to home. So we're seeing that that's actually starting to have a positive impact on some of our community shopping malls. So that's something that I think people will just get into the habit of going to their local supermarket or mall. So that's something that we will see. And two pieces of interesting, two answers that we got. People said that they may consider social distancing to be something that they will carry forward in the future and reducing one-on-one interaction with people. And obviously people selectively not going out to eat anymore and probably cooking a lot more at home. So maybe the birth rate might climb at the end of COVID, you never know.
I don't think anyone who has children who's lived through the lockdown will agree with that.
Okay, fair enough.
So we have a few really good questions from Tobias. We have 3 questions. I'm going to start with the first one because I think it's a good one. What are the 2 to 3, or what are the top 2 to 3 challenges that you foresee in 2021 where technology companies could help? So who would like to take that?
So I'll say one of the things that we see now we have to react to as we go back into hiring our team members very fast is how do you hire people remotely, and how do you really onboard people remotely? It's one of the challenges that we have is, you know, we knew how to do it pre-COVID. How do we do it again? And how do we keep maintaining the culture of while we don't get this, you know, face-to-face interaction as we did before? So that's kind of one of the things where I feel technology can play a big role.
I think, look, another thing quickly on that, we're relooking at budgets and starting to think about putting more into digital. So our mindset is changing to digital first, which was always kind of there, but it's kind of now definitely a pronounced kind of directive that we have to think digital first from a digital customer experience, omni-channel, digital marketing spend. So I think that will be something that as well we will shift to become a little bit more of a technology type of company when it comes to how we're going to approach business moving forward.
So I have a question from Kim and Matt. Is there a retailer that you've seen react more successfully than their peers?
Is that for me, yeah?
I think so. And then I think it also applies to Mo, if you've seen any brands, react in a specifically positive way. So go ahead, Michelle.
So we do a World of Fashion event every year in one of the Emirates at this time of year, and it kicked off yesterday. So we've had to do a socially distant, capacity impaired version of a fashion show this year. We kicked it off last night, and it was actually amazing. We managed to comply with all safety requirements, and we still have brands that really wanted to be part of the show. So we have virtual sessions happening this week with a famous beauty blogger that we all know very well. We obviously have a shoe brand as well that's going to do a virtual shoemaking thing. So I think companies, look, we can do anything we want. It's just about sitting down and thinking about how you need to adjust what might have been a traditional approach to running your business to now something that's, permissible in the time that we are currently operating in.
Perhaps, Nadia, what I will add to this, I will reverse the question and put it in a different way. In reality, we've seen an amazing kind of solidarity and communication happening between the retailers during the COVID time. It happened that 2 years ago, we have created in Dubai the Retail Business Group, which is the association of the retailers in Dubai under the Chamber of Commerce of Dubai. And the communication among all the retailers was at the highest, at the peak during the COVID time, to coordinate among each other on so many aspects related to how we take care of our staff, when we open the malls, how we go about it, when it comes to the sanitization, security, and we shared many of the problems and tried to find the solutions that would help the entire community, not only for the large groups, but for the entire retail community at large, including the SMEs as well, into it. So the whole purpose of it, I wouldn't say that one performed better than the other. I would say that there has been lots of help from the large ones and the small ones to be able to maintain, I would say, sustain the retail business on the long run, and to keep a level of customer service which is expected today in a place like Dubai, and try to maintain, give this whole sector, which is badly affected by the lockdown, a chance of surviving what's going on.
And Mohamad, do you have any comments on? Have you seen any of the brands that you serve react really well?
Look, I think maybe I'd be cautious. We have two big retail giants as a panelist. So what I would say is, we get a lot of inspiration from what retailers in China have done. I think if there's a true example of how to pivot a business into the new world, it's looking at retailers in China who have turned their salespeople into micro influencers to sell online, and so that's kind of that to us at least has been a place where we go for inspiration of where the world is moving.
If I can add just one last thing, I think for the most part, at least from our end, what we've seen is that during COVID period, during the lockdown, a lot of people or a lot of organizations were heading away from new innovations and introducing new products and items into the market, just because either way people were kind of going back to the brands that they knew, the products that they knew, it gave them comfort and kind of security. But following that, what we're seeing now is what's grabbing headlines is really the new innovations that are coming up. So if you see a restaurant that has bubble air-conditioned outdoor spaces that allow you and your friends to kind of isolate, that's something that's going to grab a headline. If it's a new menus that are printed out and you can just scan the menu, that's something that people are posting about. So I think these new innovations that are kind of addressing the issues with the pandemic, I think those are what are making companies stand out and kind of have a say or have more coverage, let's say.
Thank you. Do we have any final questions from the audience before we wrap up? Okay, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Thank you so much to our panelists. Saad, thank you for preparing that very insightful presentation.
Of course.
Michelle, Mansour, and Mohamad, thank you so much for your time. That was a fantastic session. For everyone else, we're going to be taking a break for an hour and we'll be back here at 2:30 Dubai time for the session with Chris Rogers and Talal Baya on what investors really want. So we will see you in an hour. And of course, everyone is welcome to stick around and network. The room will still be open.